Welcome to the EUC 635 Professional Project presentation. Our first candidate is Alyssa Bianchi, and she will be presenting on a kindergarten interactive vocabulary guide this evening. I would like to introduce our distinguished panel, starting with Michael Oletta. Many of you know Michael. And Lorraine Andrews is joining us. As you know, I am Cheryl Watson, Phase 2 Director for Sierra Nevada College in our Graduate Teacher Education Department. And tonight we will be having 4 presentations. I'd like to ask you to make certain, I check mine also, that your cell phone is off. And I've put these guys in charge of the door. Those of you that are sitting in the back, you're in charge, as we don't want to be interrupted as our candidate presents. We've got Ashley and Alyssa. We've got too much today. All right. Alyssa, when you are ready, let me get seated, please, and then we will begin.
So my name is Alyssa Bianchi. I currently teach as a kindergarten teacher at a Title I school in Carson City, Nevada. When I was thinking about what I wanted to choose for my project, I really wanted it to be something that I can truly implement in my own classroom. As you can imagine, as a kindergarten teacher, I have facilitated numerous read-alouds. And what I've noticed is that students tend to disengage due to lack of opportunities for student discourse. So that really inspired me to research the effects of interactive read-aloud. An interactive read-aloud, in comparison to a traditional read-aloud, it replaces the role of the student being a quiet listener and kind of then shifts into becoming an active and more engaged participant. So this instructional guide provides all sorts of activities and strategies along with those interactive read-alouds that will promote vocabulary acquisition, student engagement, as well as reading comprehension. Going into my abstract, the research that I found is that students can make tremendous growth when a teacher administers a read-aloud up to 3 times. So my instructional guide applies the usage of that research, and you'll see that a little bit more as we dig a little bit deeper in there. But each read-aloud comes along with 3 interactive. Each read-aloud, comes along with 3 lessons. So that kind of leads me over to my project goals. My primary goal of this project is to develop an effective, research-based instructional guide to provide kindergarten teachers with resources that engage students in an interactive read-aloud. And then a secondary project goal is to foster student vocabulary acquisition, reading comprehension, and engagement by integrating interactive read-alouds into kindergarten literacy curriculum. So really, in hindsight, In hindsight, really what we're looking at here is how can we're all, maybe not all, but kindergarten teachers, as you can imagine, we do a lot of read-alouds. It's kind of the way to introduce a lot of those new complex texts. And how can we do that and implement and use our time wisely? We only have 6 hours in the day with these kids. We're reading that story aloud. How can we make the most out of it? So my first professional question that I focused on was, what effective research-based strategies can teachers use to integrate interactive read-alouds into existing kindergarten literacy curricula? So again, something I discovered in my research is that simply reading a story aloud is not always adequate enough for students to develop their vocabulary and reading comprehension. Instead, literacy instruction should rely heavily on student discourse, and an interactive read-aloud does provide those opportunities for student discourse and being able to ask questions, make predictions, and just use new vocabulary in more meaningful ways, multiple times to really get it in their heads. And then the second question is, how do interactive read-alouds enhance kindergarten students' vocabulary acquisition, reading comprehension, and engagement? So, again, in my research I discovered that 1/4 of all kindergartners enter kindergarten with inadequate language and vocabulary. As you can imagine, this can negatively affect their comprehension abilities later on. So kindergarten teachers can really capitalize on the usage of these interactive read-alouds as a way to, again, promote those opportunities to use the new vocabulary over and over and in a more meaningful way, and also to promote a positive and safe environment where students can feel comfortable enough to raise their hand and ask that question. You know, when you think about how read-alouds were even when we were kids, or how some of the teachers still do this, is when you read a story, they read it, and the student asks questions, it's no, at the end, please, and then at that point, it's gone. They don't care what that word means. They don't really care about that prediction that they were thinking might happen. So it's just providing those strategically placed stopping points throughout the read-aloud. And then, so it provides them a strategy to expose them into a variety of complex texts and new vocabulary. And then the professional standards that I focused on, the first being from the International Literacy Association, Professional Standard 5, focusing on learners in the literacy environment, and really what it states is that teachers need to make sure that students are provided with a literacy-rich environment. And again, going back to that positive, safe place where students can feel comfortable collaborating with one another, having that discourse. So I do feel that my project hits that pretty on point. And the next one, again, for my in-task, I really thought, from my research, I found that the environment is such a big deal for some of these kids. So I wanted to hit that again, being the learning environment. So not only do they purposefully plan to make sure that there's that student discourse, they also work with other people to make sure that there's that positive collaboration happening in the classroom. And then next would be my Nevada academic content standards. The first being, both being reading literature. First being, the students can retell familiar stories, so that comprehension component. And the next being asking and answering questions about words that they don't know. And that would be the vocabulary component of my project. And then before we kind of dive deep into the instructional guide, a reference that I would really like to kind of highlight is this one right here, Lynn, Learning Word Meanings from Teachers' Repeated Story Read Aloud in EFL, or English Foreign Language Primary Classrooms. So although it was primarily about this English foreign language, I like to think a lot of times that all kindergartners are language learners. And they come in many times not knowing, and we are kind of that first person to teach them the components of our language. So the way that she wrote her research, it really kind of motivated me to, let me start that over. The way I set up my instructional guide, similar to how she did. So she said that if you read the story at least 3 times, and at least, meaning the student has that opportunity over and over, they've heard the words the first time, so you kind of are able to highlight those new words, strategically plan that into your lesson. And then the second time, really focusing on, you know, the characters, who's in the story, what's happening in the story, what are some predictions, kind of making more meaning of that text. And then the third lesson, as you can kind of see, is kind of that retell. Now, what I noticed in the kindergarten standard is retell familiar stories. When I first started teaching kindergarten, I thought, okay, does that mean the 3 Little Pigs or all of these familiar stories? But I see it now, after doing all this research, is they need a few times to see it. They need a few times to hear it and to understand it and to be able to ask those questions and make just a little bit more meaning and some connections there. So this reference really kind of hit home for me on that one. So kind of going into that, I'd love to walk you guys through. Thank you. Excuse me. drinking too fast. Okay. If you would please open up to just the first blue tab, it's on page 3. Oh, sorry, that just fell apart. Yeah, sorry. So you can see it is separated into 5 separate components. The first being the introduction, so you'll find the title page, signature page, table of contents, abstract, rationale, and a letter to teachers. The next highlighted component is that interactive read aloud instructional steps and strategies. Here you're going to be able to find all 12 lessons with a quick title to go along with it, mostly based on the activities that you're going to be doing. Down below you'll find the standards, where you'll find that standards matrix. Below, again, the references and the annotated bibliography, where you will find those 12 citations to support my project. If you would now just point to go over to the next green tab, it's on page 7. This is just something I'd like to highlight really quick. It's just a letter to teachers that just really breaks down in a very simple way how this instructional guide is going to be laid out. It talks about the differences between a traditional, or also known in the research as a simple read aloud, and kind of the difference between that and then an interactive read aloud, and how you can transition into that. And then as well as how it's going to be laid out. It explains here that each read aloud is going to come along with 3 lessons. So you're going to, like for instance, it'd be lesson 1, 2, 3 are all going to be the same books, and you're going to want to do those in order because they build off of each other. So then if you just go over to the next blue tab on page 46, this is a lesson that I just thought I could walk you guys through. This is one that is one of my favorites. I've done all of these in my classroom, this one being one that my students love the most. And I don't know if you've had too many interactions with kindergarten students, but I have learned that it's very hard for them to ask a question. Rather, they like to notice things. I see your shirt is blue. It's not, why is, so they've had a very hard time asking questions. So I wanted to really come up with a fun and engaging way for them to figure that out. So up at the top, you'll find just the Nevada Academic Content Standards. Quickly down below, you'll find a very specific objective. And then down in the background, I note to the teachers where in the steps it is. So it says right away, it's the second time you're going to read this story. And then again, the focus. So the focus of the interactive read aloud is to encourage them to ask questions, right? So it says it plain and simple right there. As a teacher, I feel like I would appreciate the simplicity and the straight to the pointness of this. And then if you just turn to the next page on 47, highlights just how the students are going to be engaged, and then the steps to the lesson. Throughout my entire instructional guide, the steps to the lesson are going to be mainly the interactive read aloud component. It will be strategically planned stopping points. It'll say stop on page 3 and say this, right? And it will go along right with that text. And that'll be that opportunity to have students, whether it's make a prediction, or students are going to talk about a vocabulary word that we've already highlighted, or whatever it is, it's just an opportunity for that student discourse. So it's rather than the students are listening quietly, they're really kind of take lead in that. It's really not much the teacher talk, it's more the students talking. And if you just turn to the next page again, it's just that rest of it on page 48, the assessment, really plain and simple, what does mastery look like, and then the differentiation. So if you turn to the next page, I'll be able to kind of explain exactly what the activity that comes after the interactive read aloud. So it's just going to be the question wheel spinner. So all they do on this first page is just a quick and easy directions for the teacher. What do they need to create it? How do students use it? And then just a quick example. So it talks about each color, as you can see on the following page of the actual copy, is a who, what, when, where, why, and how. And the students just play with their partner, they flip it, they have to ask and answer questions about the text. I did use this in my own classroom, and they absolutely love it. And oddly enough, my administrator did walk in on this one, so she was all about it. She loved how the students were asking questions and very engaged throughout the whole thing, and then that sense of metacognition, being able to ask questions, make those connections to the text. So If you'll then just flip over to the the next green on page 131. Oh, wait. Oh, yes. No. We missed the references. The one right before that, I'm sorry. On page 126 are going to be those references. So I separated it out to be those cited storybooks and then some images in public domain images throughout my entire project. And then lastly, on the last green tab is just that annotated bibliography title page. And if you turn on that next page, you will just find 12 separate references that support the project I'm doing. So, how can this change anything, right? It's something that we have to think about when we're doing our projects. And I think that mostly it just gives teachers the tools that they need to make that shift from the traditional older ways where the teacher is always the one talking, and letting go of that control and allowing the students to make those connections and talk with their partner and being able to strategically place those partners together. There's so many ways that you can make changes throughout that and make that grow. And then who can utilize this? Of course, any kindergarten teacher can look seeking an engaging way to teach literacy instruction, can absolutely benefit from this. And as well, I do believe that any K through second or primary school teachers can benefit from this as well, because you can kind of hype it up a little bit, ask some deeper level questions. So I've really seen a lot of progress in my students. I'm really, really excited about it. As Michael and I have been working on it together, I've been doing these lessons with my students as I've gone. And I'm really excited to say that the data was recognized this morning at a meeting, which I was really excited about. I was the highest growth in kindergarten this year, which is really exciting to see compared to some of the more seasoned teachers. So clearly these new ways are working, and I hope to be able to share them with more people, and I'm really excited about this. So I could cry because I'm so excited, but thank you for everything you guys have done. So that is it.
Thank you, Alyssa, so much. It's kind of a fulfillment of a dream. And you've reached your goal. Now what will you do? Maybe enjoy your summer? Excellent. And as you can see, Alyssa's project, and we'll pass that around to you in the back for you to look at. Are you going to stay for a bit, Alyssa?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I thought that you might. We'll pass her project around so that others can view it, but Michael was her exemplary faculty member as a project director and really brought out Alyssa's talents. Thank you, Alyssa.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so you may keep all your things here. This is called Jack in the Box now, because you as an audience can please step out, and we're going to grill Alyssa with questions, and then in a few minutes we will invite you back in for our next presentation. Yes. Yes. This evening I'd like to welcome you to the EDUC 635 Master of Arts in Teaching Professional Project Presentations. Our second candidate this evening is Ashley Porter. And we're very excited to have Ashley present, and I know she's excited to get this over. But with that said, Ashley, we will be multitasking as a panel. So, as luck would have it, we won't be giving you as much eye contact as you may want, but you may appreciate that as we most definitely read, write, listen, already all at the same time. I'd like to introduce to some of you that just walked in our distinguished professional faculty panel. And the first is Michael Laletta, who serves as, many of you know him, as a student teaching supervisor, but he's also faculty in our Phase 2 department. And also Laureen Andrews. Laureen, also student teaching supervisor, and we are very honored to have them this evening. I'm also honored to have my cameraman, Jim, back there, as always. All right. He's dressed for success. Oh wait, he's already had success. Okay, we're good.
Would you just get on with it? I gotta get my shorts and t-shirt back on.
I know, for sure.
Man.
It's all for you, Ashley. All for you.
Masters are important. Come on.
These are very important. Ashley, when you are ready, you may start.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
Give us 1 moment.
No worries. Good afternoon, guys. Hi, I'm Ashley, as Cheryl has mentioned, and I'm really excited to be talking about my project. It's been such a whirlwind working on this, and it's a work of heart, which always makes things a little more interesting and a little more fun. So I'm really just honored to be showing you guys this, and thanks to the EDUC 628 people for being here. I know it's possibly an interesting thing to kind of see what we've all come up with, but you're on your way, and this was kind of the most fun part, so I'm sure you'll enjoy it. The reason why I chose what I did for my project is because growing up I was very successful academically in elementary school, but as I went into middle school and high school, I definitely didn't continue with that academic success. And I think a huge part of that was because I did not believe in myself. I didn't believe in my capabilities. I did not believe that I could achieve what I could before, and I kind of gave up, if I'm being realistic with everyone here. And then as I worked with my 5th graders, who I work with now, on their kind of motivation and self-perception skills, I realized that oftentimes they'd give up if they felt like they couldn't achieve. So a lot of my research that you're going to see today went into, okay, what does it mean to have a good self-perception? And how does that reflect in academic achievement? And more importantly, how can teachers use that in a reading curriculum to help support their reading skills teaching? And so if I can point you to my poster, the title of my project was Student Self-Perception, Motivation, and Engagement, a reading resource guide for 5th grade teachers. And on my poster, you'll see an abstract, which is a summary of what I did in my project, which is I tried to create a reading resource guide that allowed teachers to use SEL skills within their reading curriculum in a way where they could implement the strategies in the resource guide in a reading curriculum that already existed in their classroom. So I was hoping to make it something that wasn't like a complete roundabout from what they were already doing, but something that they could make work with what they already had happening in their classroom. And so I'm hoping that as we progress and you see how my project turned out, you'll see how that actually works. So if you look above, my project goals were, the primary goal of this project is to create an effective research-based resource guide for 5th grade teachers to develop student self-perceptions and motivation within the reading curriculum. A secondary project goal is to strengthen interest in reading in 5th grade students by enhancing self-perceptions and motivations. And I wanted to answer 2 questions within my project. The first question was, what are effective self-perception and motivation development strategies that 5th grade teachers can implement? And what I learned through my research is that to help a student better understand their self-perception, you really need to provide an environment that allows them to have no possible way of comparing themselves to other students. You really want to help them see that their growth and their capabilities is based on what they can do and what they will do, not what someone next to them can do and will do. So by providing an environment where students don't compare themselves, you're actually helping them build their self-perception. You can also do this through goal setting. So by helping students create and achieve goals while they're learning in a reading curriculum, you're actually providing them the skills and tools they need to be able to see success in themselves. And so you're able to see how in a reading curriculum they're growing rather than comparing their success to someone else's success. To help students in engagement, my research showed me that engaged students have choice, so they're able to understand how to choose a book they're interested in and stay engaged with that book. And they're also able to have multiple different types of opportunities to work with different people in their classroom. So that is something that I tried to implement in this strategy guide. My second question was, how does developing 5th grade students' self-perception and motivation impact their interest and engagement in reading? My research showed me that long-term reading engagement is directly affected by student self-perception. This is actually a larger indicator than their current academic achievement or grade level, their socioeconomic status, their race, their gender, or any other information we collect on that student. So if we as teachers are able to help students have a better self-perception, we can change their long-term academic path in a way that's really meaningful. So by helping them become stronger readers through exercises that increase their self-perception, engagement, and motivation, we're actually helping them have more long-term academic success. Throughout my project, I aim to meet certain professional and content standards. These are listed over on that side of the screen. The first standards I tried to meet were professional standards listed by the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development. And I thought my project aimed to reach 2 particular standards. However, I'd like to have you guys focus on the second one. Tenet 4 states, each student has access to personalized learning and is supported by qualified caring adults. I believe by giving a student the opportunity to have a positive self-perception and by helping them build meaningful goals, we as teachers show we care, and that will help in their long-term academic success. The Interstate Teacher Assessment and Support Consortium asks us in Standard 3 to think about our learning environments. And in this standard, they state, the teacher works with others to create environments that support individual and collaborative learning and that encourage positive social interaction, active engagement in learning, and self-motivation. And I'm hoping that you guys can see that this directly relates to my project. However, I'd like to point out the idea that a learning environment can play a really meaningful role in a student's self-perception. So again, by offering them opportunities to not compare themselves to others, you're allowing them to compare their success to what they need to achieve. And that is why, as we look through the book, you'll see that my lessons do not have an actual grading scale. Students have a grading scale of not yet, meets expectations, and exceeds expectations. And that does not coagulate into a letter grade. And so that is because I want to give them the opportunity to take the feedback and see how they grow. And that is really important to Standard 3. Washoe County School District has social and emotional learning standards. 1B says demonstrate knowledge of personal strengths, challenges, and potential, which I believe directly relates to self-perception and engagement, and how a student sees themselves and sees what they can achieve. And finally, although as I mentioned before, this strategy book is aimed to be used with multiple different reading curriculums and reading standards, throughout this book, you'll see that RL52 is used quite often, which states that students will be able to determine a theme of a story, drama, or poem from details in the text, including how characters in a story or drama respond to challenges or how the speaker in a poem reflects on a topic, summarize the text. So while my main goal wasn't to reach this standard, I do believe you'll see this often in my book, in my resource guide. And finally, at the bottom of my poster, you'll see that I've mentioned 3 very important references to my research, and I'd like to point out Dr. Rees' article, Teaching for Literacy Engagement, which is from the Journal of Literacy and Research. And his research actually comes from 2004, which may seem a bit dated, but I was very much inspired by what he did and the work he did to provide teachers with a framework, like mine, that kind of worked around a reading curriculum, but allowed teachers to see the importance in making sure that students had opportunities to work in teams, students had opportunities to set goals and stay self-persistent, have self-efficacy, and focus less on standards-based and skills-based learning aimed towards tests, and more so to their long-term academic achievement. And so as we move forward, I would like us to take a look at our book. This is my reading resource guide I've created, and as you can see, the title is Student Self-Perception, Motivation, and Engagement, a Reading Resource Guide for 5th grade teachers. As we turn the pages through the book, you'll first find my signature page, and then you'll find my table of contents, which points out the contents of my reading resource guide. The title page, the signature page, the table of contents, an abstract which summarizes my project, the rationale, which tries to tell teachers why this is important work, and then a note to teachers explaining how they can put this into their own reading curriculum. And then finally, we have 12 strategies I've created that I believe will help teachers create an opportunity to include SEL skills in their current reading curriculum. So I would like to point out a really important lesson in my resource guide. If you go to the blue tab, this is how my resource guide is laid out for every strategy. So at the top, you'll find the title along with the grade I've aimed this lesson for, as well as the time it will take. You'll see that each lesson has an objective.
You'll also see that each lesson aims to meet a certain standard. In this case, this lesson focuses more on the SEL skills than the reading skills. However, this I Think I Am lesson is very imperative to students understanding how to create positive thoughts from their negative thoughts and how to be able to build a positive self-perception and move on through tough assignments. So it's really, really important for students to have tools in their tool set before they even start a reading curriculum to be able to pull on when things get tough, because things will get tough. So if you go to the green tab, that's kind of a small summary of the activities we will be learning in this lesson. So what I've done is I've created a lesson which takes students through 4 strategies I believe help them build a positive self-perception when going through a negative time. So the first is that I want them to exercise. It is scientifically proven that exercise helps release endorphins, which allows us to stay positive even when we're not feeling so. And so I'm encouraging them to get up out of their chair and then go ahead and move forward. Then they have an opportunity to release their negative thoughts. So they are able to see how writing down negative thoughts and kind of clearing their minds helps them understand what negative thoughts are occurring and how they can get through it. And as you can see, I've also provided an example on page 29. I know I'm asking you to flip a little bit, apologies. That shows how students can do this in a colorful and meaningful manner of just kind of releasing those negative thoughts. Then they're asked to organize those thoughts into things they can change and things they can't change. And then finally, they rip up those thoughts and create an I Can poster that shows their positive affirmation for them to see. So they're actually going through the steps of taking their negative thoughts and creating something positive out of that. And you'll see that on the poster as step number 3, as create. And then, of course, you must celebrate. You always have to celebrate when you've done something good for yourself. So I encourage them that when they're able to create that positive affirmation, they have the opportunity to celebrate. And I'm happy to say that after this project was done, I was able to do this with my students before their SBAC testing. And it was really meaningful for them. And we got to hang those up for them to see that they could change those thoughts. And it was really meaningful because I heard them say things such as, I can do it, attitude before everything, things like that that help them kind of see that even when faced with something hard like an SBAC test, they can move forward. I would like to encourage you to move to the pink tab. And the reason why is, although I've gone through one strategy, I would like to point out that even though I've mentioned that they won't be getting a letter grade for every assignment, this is an opportunity for them to reflect with the teacher and grade themselves on what they did with the feedback, what they did with the feedback, and how they can move forward. So they get to look and see, okay, my teacher gave me a not yet, but did I do anything with that? Did I grow from that? And so they're actually getting to reflect on their progress throughout the journey, and they're able to see what they were able to accomplish over the 9 weeks they were with this unit. And then, together with the teacher, they're able to come up with a cumulative grade based on how they feel they did with their teacher's feedback. And then finally, I'd like to point out the purple tab, which takes us to my standards matrix. This is where you can find how each of my lessons meets a standard by either the Washoe County Social and Emotional Learning Standards or the Nevada Academic Content Standards. After that, I also have a references and resources guide for teachers to find more information. And then following that, I do have my annotated bibliography, with all of my research. So as you can see, this was a very meaningful project to me because I felt like it gave teachers something that I felt like I needed when I was a kid. And I'm already seeing some of these strategies and some of the language I learned from my research working with some of my students. And I'm hoping that as teachers use this, they're able to see how easy it is to build positive self-perception, to build engagement, and to build motivation within their current reading curriculum. So thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you guys have questions, I would love to answer them.
It's a little difficult to imagine her without any, self-confidence. Most definitely, Ashley. Congratulations. Once again, Jack in the Box of our inclusion candidate this evening, Erica McKenzie. And Erica will be talking about restorative practices. So we'll be anxious for a definition, Erica, in your presentation this evening. Again, I'd like to introduce, for those of you that are new, I'm Cheryl Watson, Phase 2 Director here in the Graduate Teacher Education Department at Sierra Nevada College. And I would like to introduce our distinguished faculty panel who will be evaluating our third candidate, Erica's performance this evening. The first one is Michael Loletta. Michael? Michael is a student teaching supervisor and also faculty in our Phase 2 department, along with Laureen Andrews, another student teaching supervisor, and Erica is project director this semester. Erica, as I mentioned to the other candidates, we will be multitasking as we listen, read, and watch you, but we won't be giving you too much eye contact, which I might appreciate, as we have to be a teacher and do our tasks. When you are ready,
Awesome. Well, good evening. I'm Erica McKenzie, and I'm a 6th grade teacher at Virginia Palmer Elementary School. And I first want to thank you guys for the opportunity to allow me to present in front of you. I'm so excited to share restorative practices. It's kind of a new thing, so there's not a ton of research out there, but the research that is out there, it's really powerful, and I can't wait to share that with you. So the title of my project is Restorative Practices, an instructional guide for grade 6 middle school educators. And restorative practices are all about repairing and building relationships. And so what inspired me to research this is, as a student and from a child and all the way till now, I've always been pretty shy, and I actually didn't really have a genuine conversation with any teacher until my sophomore year of high school. And so a teacher by the name of Mrs. Kelly asked me, "How are you?" And I was ready to answer this question because I recited it my whole life. I said, "Good, how are you?" And I went to walk away, but she stopped me and she said, "No, how are you?" And that was the first time someone actually wanted to genuinely know how I was doing. And so I was able to find my voice and tell her about what was going on in my life. And then I was inspired to come to school. It was no longer just about, I'm into athletics, and so I had to go to school to play the sports. It wasn't that anymore. It was, I want to be a part of this community. I have this awesome educator that cares about me. And so that really motivated me to become a better learner. And so restorative practices, they're all about that. It's all about giving students opportunities to see that their voice matters, that we want to know about their thoughts, their feelings, opinions. We care about them. And it's all about community building and then just improving class climate and culture and so on and so forth. And so the primary goal of this project is to develop an effective research-based instructional guide of restorative practices for middle school educators. And the secondary project goal is to foster relationships among middle school students to integrate, or by integrating restorative practices into the existing classroom community. And so the first question that is asked is, what effective research-based strategies can educators implement to integrate restorative practices into the middle school classroom community? And the first restorative practice that I'm going to share with you is called circles. And this is a highly effective practice. And I'm actually so excited because I've had the honor to implement it in my own classroom. And so a circle is just how it sounds. You set up in a circle with the students and yourself as the educator, and then there's a talking piece. And there's a few guidelines that you follow. If you have the talking piece, you're the speaker. If not, you're the listener. And you just kind of tell your students, trust that you'll know what to say, and trust that you'll know how much to say. And so as educators, you're probably wondering, well, I have a lot more to do than to sit in a circle with my class. However, it's extremely powerful. And so the first time I did this, we set up in a circle, and then I asked the question, how are you feeling today? So I started off, it was a pretty good day, so that was good. I shared my piece, and then I sent it to the next person, and I thought it would take about 5 minutes. And then it was 35 minutes later when every single student was able to share their piece. And I had 4 students that cried their eyes out. From one question, how are you feeling? And that was because they've been holding in all of this emotion, all of this stuff going on in their lives. I was able to find out my student the week before was homeless, and now they are finally they just found housing and 2 really bad divorces with a couple of my students. And so it was extremely powerful. So yes, as educators, we're always trying to find that extra time but I promise this is worth it. Circles are worth it, they're very powerful, and then, believe it or not, giving them this time to share their piece. Now when I went to my instruction, I didn't have those behavioral issues. I didn't have to remind you to be on task, or can I speak with you in the hallway, because students were there, they were motivated to learn. And so that's just one practice, one strategy used with restorative practices, with restorative practices. And then another is the social and emotional learning techniques. And so this could be conflict resolution, self-efficacy, getting students to have that self-awareness and social awareness. And this leads into the second question: how do restorative practices foster relationships among middle school students? And by allowing students to have the opportunity to identify themselves as learners and as human beings, how do I function in this situation versus this, and then develop a social awareness, this just automatically transitions into that relationship building. Because now I'm aware of how I act and respond in situations, and now I'm noticing what my friends and my peers and my educators are doing in certain situations. And so students and educators develop this sense of understanding and empathy with one another. And so as far as the standards, I used the professional organization named CASTLE, and the standard that I chose was self-awareness. And this states the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions and thoughts and how these influence behavior. The in-task standard that I chose was Standard 2, Learning Differences, which states the teacher uses understanding of individual differences in diverse cultures and communities to ensure inclusive learning environments that enable each learner to meet high standards. And then the big driving force of each lesson in this instructional guide were the Washoe County School District Social and Emotional Learning Standards. So self-awareness 1A states demonstrating knowledge of one's emotions, and then social awareness 3A states demonstrate awareness of other people's emotions and perspectives. I really tried hard to find some research that said, no, this doesn't work. And it is a recent topic, but everything was so powerful and beneficial. And so researching actually was fun. And so that made this project really awesome and worth it. A few researchers that I focused on that gave a lot of powerful information were Broderick, Burke Taylor and Kehoe in 2018, and then Clausen, Davis, Gerwitz, and Gregory in 2016. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Clausen's research. And so these researchers actually came up with different practices that educators could use within the school. So they just changed the way teachers ask students questions. So for example, you have a student that's off task, or maybe they're talking back or whatever it is. And so it's been a long day as an educator, you might say, you know what, go out in the hallway or go to the office. And this is what they were finding within the schools they were studying, that there were so many behavioral referrals. And just by implementing restorative practices and giving students the chance, by asking them the question, what happened or what's going on, now you heard about those situations where they didn't eat that day, or their favorite aunt and their family just passed away. And so this is why they're not motivated to do the work or the task at hand. And so just by asking what happened, now educators have this understanding and they develop this relationship with their students. And so 1 year later, behavior referrals dropped 30%. Just by asking a simple question, what happened, what's going on, how can I help you? And so it's really, really powerful research, and I'm so excited to share with you guys and to continue implementing it in my own classroom. And so now if we can move on to the instructional guide. On the pink tab, you'll see the table of contents. And the lessons are divided into 3 sections. So we have lessons based on self-awareness, social awareness, and then relationship skills. And then the purple tab discusses what is really driving this instructional guide, which is the restorative practice known as circles. And so these are guidelines of how you can conduct a circle, what is a circle, how often should I use it, what are the benefits of this. And so it really breaks it down for educators that want to implement this in their own classroom. Now if I could have you flip to the top blue tab, this is a lesson that I would like to share with you on communication strategies. And so each lesson, it's recommended that you start with a circle. And I talked a lot about the community building, those aspects of circles, but you can also use them academically. So by if we're working on communication, we can set up circle, and then you can ask the question, what is communication? And now each student has their turn, and you can get that pre-assessment, what do they already know about communication? And then you can follow up with whatever questions you need to, depending on your lesson. And then if you turn the page here to the next blue tab, after circle, students will watch an informational video, and then they will understand which forms of communication there are, what type of communicator they prefer, and then they can complete this handout and start to see patterns in their behavior. For example, this question says, identify patterns in your behavior and synthesize how you typically respond when someone disagrees with you. And so now students are not only learning about communication, but starting to see patterns in their own behavior. If you turn to the next tab, there's a task called, or an activity called Hula Hoop Mania. And it gets a little crazy, that's why the mania is in there. And so it seems like a very simple task, but it's all about your communication. So if you're inefficient on your communication strategies, you're going to fail. And so this task, students are in groups of anywhere from 4 to 10, and you have your hula hoop. And now the only rules, it has to start shoulder heights, palms up, and you get to use your pointer and middle finger. And now our goal is to work together to lower it to the ground. Easy, right? No, because not everyone's on the same page, and all of a sudden the hula hoop looks like it's levitating. And so the verbal communicators, it's your fault, and you need to lower it, and they start blaming, and then you see your nonverbal communicators that are kind of going into their shell. And so you bring the class back as a whole group, and you talk about, hey, what worked? And they're probably going to say nothing the first time. And then you say, well, what do we know? What do we know about communication? I heard the verbalizing, what else can we do? And then all of a sudden you let them struggle a little more, but the conversation shifts from we need to do this, or one person telling someone to do something, to what do you guys think? What are some strategies that you think we should use? And then sure enough, by the end of it, they all are able to achieve this goal. And the excitement with that is awesome, because now you have students proud of their teammates because they collectively achieved this goal. And that is huge, because that goes back into your classroom. And now we trust each other. We know that, oh, she doesn't like to be told what to do, so I need to do it, make sure I, ask her, what do you think first before I have this discussion. And so it's really powerful stuff, and that really helps improve your classroom community. And then after, there's a hula hoop reflection, where students not only identify which communication methods were used from their team, but from themselves as well. And each lesson ends with a rubric in which the educator can assess and see how students performed on this. And so restorative practices are extremely powerful. It's something I feel blessed that I've come across, because it's already changed my classroom culture. And this is something I will implement every single year from here on out. And some of my coworkers that know I've been working on this, they've already started implementing circles in their own classroom. And they're bugging me, when do we get your lessons? When can we do this? And so I'm super excited to share this with the staff at my school, and I hope to see this within the district, and then hopefully across the country, because it's important for students to be able to have that voice. And if we're worried about time as educators, you don't need to be, because we're already doing this stuff. We have PBIS, we have SEL, but instead of teaching students how they might feel in a certain situation, you're actually putting them in that situation, and they get to experience it themselves. And they get to have that self-awareness, that social awareness, and develop those relationship skills. And so thank you so much for allowing me to have this opportunity to present in front of you. I really appreciate it, and I'd love to answer any questions that you may have.
We are rolling tonight. Congratulations, everybody. Thank you so much. Nicole, wow, you're got some hard competition here. I know you'll bring it. Again, see you later. That she will save, and it needs to go into the SNC repository at the end of 6:35. So that's what you're working on now. At the EDUC 635 Master of Arts in Teaching Candidate Symposium is Nicole Pascal. And Nicole, we've already introduced our distinguished panel and myself. You know who I am, but I believe we have some guests in the audience. Would you like to introduce them,
I
please?
do. So, those of you that have been with me for 3 years know that I talk about this one all day, every day. And Cheryl was excited to meet him, and Florian's already met him. And then my dad and my stepmom who came to support me, which I just love because they've all been hearing about it for 3 years, and everyone is ready for it to be done.
Exactly. Definitely. And your son's name?
This is Ethan.
Ethan. Hi, Ethan. Ethan, what grade are you in?
Second.
Second?
And my project's on second graders, so I tested a lot of my stuff on this guy. He was my tester.
Is his picture in any of
It should be.
Most definitely. I hope he exceeded mastery. No pressure.
He did. He gave me some
In all
pointers.
areas, exactly. All right, Nicole, we are ready for Nicole to present on second grade vocabulary acquisition. Nicole, when you are ready, so is the panel.
Good evening, and thanks for staying so long. I know it's late in the night. My name is Nicole Pascal, and I'm a second grade teacher at a Title I school in Reno. I've been there for about 2.5 years. And while this project, Growth in Vocabulary Acquisition, an instructional guide for second grade teachers, was sparked by research for low socioeconomic students, this guide was sparked by that research, however, is made for all students. So of any school, it can be upper to lower, it can be EL students. All students can benefit from this instructional guide. So the project goals for my project were, the primary goal of this project is to develop a research-based vocabulary acquisition instructional guide for second grade teachers. So this instructional guide is meant for second grade teachers to understand that their instruction needs to be explicit. Oftentimes teachers do a passive way of teaching kids vocabulary where they open a book and let's say they're reading something and they come to a word that the kids might not know, and so they just quickly say the definition and continue reading. And so this guide is teaching teachers that they need to be more explicit in their instruction, teach the kids the vocabulary words as a separate lesson. The secondary project goal is to provide second grade students with strategies and methods for vocabulary acquisition in order to foster success in English language arts. So research has shown that a strong vocabulary helps in all areas of English language arts, so reading, writing, speaking, all of that. If you don't have a good vocabulary, you're going to struggle in all areas. So the abstract, which explains where all of this came from. So personal story, and I didn't know I was doing this to my kiddos, was when I first started teaching at a low-income school, or a low socioeconomic school, I didn't know that I was throwing out words daily that nobody knew what I was saying. So I was teaching a math lesson, and every single day, if a child got a right answer, I'd say, that's accurate. And then one day I said, hey guys, do you know what accurate means? And they said no. And I was like, oh my goodness. So every time I said that, I meant you were right. And now I need to teach you math vocabulary, because I've been saying that that's accurate. And so that sparked it. And so the research shows that those kiddos from low socioeconomic status enter school 6,000 words behind middle to upper class students. That research also found that teachers are only utilizing 4% of their 6-hour day, if it's a 6-hour day, to teach vocabulary, 4%. So we're not teaching vocabulary at all explicitly, intentionally. It's a passive thing that we do, and the kids are not able to have this robust and rich vocabulary used in all areas of their education if they're not receiving that instruction, that direct, explicit instruction as opposed to passive instruction. And that gap will increase if we do not, as teachers, begin to really go through vocabulary. It'll increase 3,000 words a year. So if these kiddos do not start to learn, it's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse until their vocabulary doesn't enable them to have the literacy skills necessary to be successful students. So to bridge that gap was the point of my research and the lessons so that kids can get contextualized vocabulary that they can use in all areas of their education. So that must be a priority to have it be explicit. Professional questions and rationale are: what are effective strategies for teaching vocabulary acquisition to second grade students of all abilities and varied vocabulary? So we all know, we hear the words tier, right? So tier 1 instruction, tier 2 instruction, that also applies to vocabulary. So we have tier 1 vocabulary, which is just very basic vocabulary, tier 2 vocabulary, which is our academic vocabulary, which is what this guide focuses on. So tier 3 vocabulary is more content specific, so words just about social studies. But tier 2 goes through all subjects and enables them to be successful in multiple areas. So the majority of the book teaches, and the letter to teacher says, I've utilized tier 2 vocabulary, although this guide can be differentiated in a manner of remediation or bringing it up higher for your high students to tier 3 if they are at that level and ready for that amount. So an explicit, like I said a million times, it just has to be intentional and research-based. And increased in frequency, like I said, so 4% is actually not enough teaching of vocabulary. How does vocabulary acquisition development equip second grade students with skills necessary to be successful in English language arts? So the ability for students to comprehend, to understand, to use vocabulary is pivotal to their education. The students need to be able to not only have an expressive vocabulary, but also a receptive vocabulary. So as they learn the words, they need to be able to express them in their reading, their writing, their speaking. So we teach kids words, but we don't ask them, once they've learned them, how can we use that word? What should we use that word with? So now we've learned this big word, cool, let's stick it in our bank. We'll put it on the word wall. So research shows that wide reading, which has been known for years to be a good thing, we do it in Daily 5, everybody read for 20 minutes silently, or word walls have been found to not be effective methods of teaching vocabulary. However, I researched that if the ways those words come on the wall are novel and unique and creative, that the kids will actually understand those words. So as opposed to just seeing a wall and the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, every word that goes with it, they're going to say, hey, I learned that word, and now I understand what it means, not just how to spell it. The references that I used, my most used reference was Cullen Johnson, and the article is Improving the Acquisition of Novel Vocabulary Through the Use of Imagery Interventions. So when I get into the book, you guys will see that the majority of the lessons involve music, art, dance, different ways for them to be really creative, because research has also shown that the more creative the kids are, the better they learn. And so a lot of them are art, which is fun for the kiddos to do. They get to interact with each other more, which has also been shown to be more effective for learning. So now, and my content standards. So professional standard number 5 from the International Literacy Association recommends that literacy professionals meet the developmental needs of all learners. Like I said, this guide can be used for all learners, with a variety of print and digital materials to engage and motivate all learners by fostering a positive climate that supports a literacy-rich environment. So we know as teachers that a literacy-rich environment is paramount to have literacy, or to have print and text all over your entire room, so it's really important. So a lot of these activities allow students and teachers to create a literacy-rich environment. The in-task standards are: a teacher understands and uses a variety of instructional strategies to encourage learners to develop deep understanding of content areas and their connections, and to build skills to apply knowledge in meaningful ways. So the part of this standard that really stuck out to me was to make connections. So they learn the word, but to make connections between what that word means and what they're learning day to day is really important. And so that standard stuck out to me there. And then, of course, we have the Nevada Academic Content Standards to determine or clarify the meaning of unknown and multiple meaning words, which you're going to see in the lesson that I'm going to show you. Based on phrases, or words and phrases based on grade 2 reading and content, choosing flexibly from an array of strategies. So we should be able to use so many different strategies to teach our kids vocabulary. And the next one is to demonstrate understanding of word relationships and nuances in word meanings. So instead of just teaching a kid a word, we need to teach them where it came from. What can I add to this word? What can I take away from this word? What can I do with two words if I put them together? Does this word change? Is the spelling different? And so understanding the nuances in word relationships really help kiddos to go beyond, how are you doing? I'm good, like Erica was saying. So they can say, oh, I'm joyful. Teaching them to use words that are not just so tier 1 words. So we're going ahead and jump into my book. So I have to steal it back. And if you can open, please, to the table of contents, the credit tab number 1, you'll see that the lessons are put in categories. So we have vocabulary acquisition through art, through poetry, through music, and through games. So all of these can be used to really engage your kids and get them wanting to learn vocabulary instead of a spelling list that they're given on Friday and pass that test and call it a day. If you guys will please turn to page 11, which is the blue tab number 2. The lesson I'm going to discuss today is called Visualizing Homographs, Using Imagery and Illustration. So I taught my class one day passively, hey, this word means 2 things. And they thought that was the most exciting thing they'd ever heard. And so now whenever they come across a word that means 2 things, Miss Pascal, bear. Bear means 2 things. And they just love it. And so this lesson, the majority of my lessons include some form of read aloud, whether it be online or the teacher reading it or a song or a video. This lesson uses a really, really old book that kids love called The King Who Reigned. And there's a page that kind of teaches the kiddos this where it says, my big sister's getting married and she says I can hold up her train. So the child's holding up a locomotive instead of a train from a bridal dress. So that shows the kids, hey, this word can mean 2 different things. And so what the kiddos get to do is they get to learn from each other. They get to learn from each other what these things can mean, and they all mean different things to each one of us. So the children are given an index card. So if you guys could turn to the yellow tab number 3. They're given an index card that has a word written already by the educator and a blank space. So I pass these out to the kids. They go to an area they're comfortable where no one else is watching them, and they will draw a picture of what they think it is. So for example, the word is spring, and I have maybe a little girl that draws beautiful flowers. And then this student, another little girl, decided, no, it's a slinky. It's a spring like that. So they have different ideas, and then what they do is they hang them all. So here I might say the word spring, and they hang all of them down. So that they can all see, oh, this is what my classmate thinks it is, because spring has 4 definitions. It could be the water coming out of the ground, different things like that. So they really get to see what their classmates think, and now when they come to that word, they're going to say, hey, I can use this in multiple ways. And that can be differentiated and be a lot of fun for them to work with later. If you'll turn to the number 4 green tab, you will see that there are lessons that include social and emotional learning, and one that includes mathematics. So vocabulary needs to be across all subject matters and not just stuck into our ELA, but into our math and our social studies and all of those other things as well. And you'll see on there, and even SEL standards can use vocabulary. Like I said, instead of saying good, you can say something else. And this was a really important thing to me because I wanted my kids to be able to catch up and to bridge that vocabulary gap, hopefully lessening that upcoming scary 3,000 words a year gap, and hoping that any teacher that reads this will understand that we need to do a lot more than 4 minutes for 4% of our day teaching vocabulary. So thank you for letting me present to you tonight, and I hope you love to teach vocabulary.
For those of you that want to stay, please do. We want to congratulate Nicole later, but we do need to grill her for just a few moments. I think we've had a very, very impressive evening. 628 students, you have a lot to step up to. Very impressed with the projects that have come out of our 635 students this semester, but more importantly, They are pulled out, drawn, dragged across the finish line by their project directors. And that's the beauty of the one-on-one mentorship that
Very true.
we at Sierra Nevada College provide. Please stay for just a few moments if you'd like. Make certain that I do get these back. And
We do get to keep one though, right?
you do.
Okay.
The candidate keeps one, correct. And I think I guess I don't. I was looking to see if I had one. There's one here, so candidates, you keep one, and then Sierra Nevada College keeps one. Obviously, those of you in 628 will be seeing these projects next semester in 635 as exemplary projects to illustrate the expectations of a MAT project, professional project. All right, thank you all so much for coming.